Can you hear me now? It's a little bit louder. I'm going to talk in here, magnify my voice a little bit. I just love to hear myself talk, as you will find out very shortly. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Matthew Just. I am on staff here at LifeSpring Church. And in case you cannot tell, or if you are a first-time guest, first of all, welcome. Dorsey Atkinson, who is our senior pastor here, is away on a very important mission, celebrating his wife's birthday at the Carrie Underwood concert. Woo! All right. So I'm sure he's all missing you this morning, doing whatever he's doing now. But I'm covering for him, and so if you walked in, and if you have been here the last couple of weeks, we kind of threw you for a loop again. So over the last couple of weeks, we've actually had tables out instead of rows, where we've been meeting in some small group settings and doing some table talk to go along with our service, kind of more of an interactive teaching experience. So a little bit about myself. I teach and am a grad student over at Georgia Southern University. I teach Calculus 2, but don't worry, I'm not going to fret away at that. I'm going to try to stay focused and not go into math. But if I mention anything about math, it is because it is always on my heart and mind. Yes, believe it or not. All right, so like I said earlier, we kind of mixed it up with this sermon series, broke off, did some table talk experience, and I hope you enjoyed that. Excellent. I'm glad you did, Preston. Got a chance to talk and meet some people, and we think that's important here. We think it's important to go beyond the service on Sunday and to talk in small groups and to learn from each other, not just from me, if you can learn anything from me. But the reason we did this is because, believe it or not, we're trying to model what Jesus did. And this is why. So the parable or the story that we're going through is one that Jesus taught. And I'm going to read the first verse of this passage that we've been going through in Mark chapter 4. This is verse 1. So this is Jesus teaching away, and this is how it goes. So again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. So this just kind of gives you a picture of who Jesus was. He was pretty creative. So does anybody know why he went out on the water? Anybody know? His voice would project, right? Does anybody know why your voice projects over water? It makes it sound better. So there's actually a physical reason, which again, I'm not going to get into. But it is something I actually studied, whatever I studied over getting my degree. But Jesus went out on the lake to project his voice. He wanted to have his voice carry to as many people as he could. And I think an important note here, it's not explicitly written, but this crowd of people was probably a melting pot, a mixing pot. It probably wasn't all religious people. It probably wasn't all scholars. It probably wasn't all teachers. It was probably a broad mix of a lot of different people. And so he said a lot of things, and if you've ever read the Bible, I'm sure you've had this experience where you read something and you say, what in the heck does that even mean? You listen to what Jesus says, and you're like, what is going on with these words? What is he saying? And I think one of the cool things about Jesus is that a lot of times he taught to everybody with the hope and with the assumption that people would go away talking about what he said, so that you can leave his talker's message and say, what did he mean by that? I can go to my friend, I can say, well, he said this, but what does that mean? Or that's kind of like this, that kind of relates to my life. And that's what this table talk is modeled after, that idea that we can learn from each other, that I may say something, Dorsey may say something, or anybody may say something that makes us think about things in a different way, and we can use each other to discuss that together. So let's go a little bit into the story that Jesus was telling. I'm just going to give a quick overview. It is called the parable of the sower. It's a pretty famous parable. Jesus actually says that to understand any parable, you need to understand this particular parable. And so this is the way it goes. There's a farmer or a sower, a farmer. Just imagine a farmer. I imagine a farmer. And he has a bunch of seed, and he's spreading the seed out over the field. And now he's not thinking about what type of soil he's throwing, right? He's just trying to get the job done. He's trying to get the seed out there. He knows that some of it may stick, some of it may not, but he's just throwing it. He's generous. So actually, I happen to have some seeds right here. I'm going to use this as an illustration, right? So there's some seeds in this paper towel, which we'll get to in a second. But we took a couple things out of this parable that I just want to recap to you. So first of all, the first thing we notice is that the sower is generous with his seed. The sower is generous. And I want you to think back. This is kind of interesting because Jesus is telling this parable and is actually paralleling what he is doing at the time. So he is out on the water and he is trying to project his voice to everybody that he can. He's being generous with his words. He wants everybody to know what he has to say. The sower is generous with his seed. Second of all, the power to transform is in the seed. It's not in the environment. The environment helps the seed transform into a plant. But that power is in the seed. So I have some seeds here, and these are from 2012. Okay, so does anybody know what would happen if I put these seeds in the ground right now? They would grow, right? They would grow. Even though these seeds are 4 years old, they would still grow. And now these are some tomato seeds that actually I kept as kind of a special sentimental reason, which I'll get to in the story I'll tell in just a minute. But the power to transform is in the seed. There's nothing wrong with the seed. The seed always works. I can put it on a shelf. I bet you could put these seeds on a shelf for 50 years in a nice, safe environment, a dry environment, and then take them out, and they hit water, and they'll grow. You could throw them in the parking lot. They would grow. And we talked about this idea that there's nothing wrong with the seed. And finally, there's also nothing wrong with the soil, just its condition. I think this is a big misconception about Christianity in the church, is that people think, oh, there must be something wrong with me. That's why I'm not growing. That's why I'm not transforming. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the seed. I'm receiving the seed. But why am I not transforming? There must be something wrong with me. Well, there is nothing wrong with you. Just possibly your condition. Just like if you plant a seed in the ground, there's nothing wrong with that soil inherently. It may just be deprived of nutrients. There may be rocks. There could be a lot of different environmental characteristics that make it challenging for a seed to grow. It's the condition. And so we had this little acronym that we talked about to help us think through this idea of cultivating the soil, right? Actually turning the soil into good soil that's going to carry the plant through to its time to bear fruit and to bear seed. And it's all about iced tea. And no, I do not mean the delicious beverage or the musical artist. I mean iced tea, as in an acronym, which we have up here. So, cultivating soil takes intention. You have to really want to do it. You have to set your mind to it. You have to be committed. You can't give up. You got to devote energy. And finally, you have to devote time. So these are some things that we took away. And throughout the last few weeks, we talked about the different types of soil. We talked about the packed soil. We talked about the rocky soil. We talked about the weedy soil. All of these characteristics, it was the condition of the soil that made it difficult for the plant to grow. So that's kind of a recap of what we have. So we got iced tea. We're going to cultivate the soil. We got it good. So today I really want to talk to you about not so much the how. The last few weeks we've talked about the how, of how do we cultivate the soil. Today is going to be more about the why. Why do we want to cultivate the soil? And now this is more or less a rhetorical question because I think anybody could give the simple answer. Why does a farmer sow seed? Why? To get a plant, to get seed, to get more than what he started. He doesn't just want to get one for one. He wants to get one for two, maybe one for three, something like that. He wants to break the odds. So let's read the last. So we're going to skip ahead and read the last verse of this particular section. And this is really going to set the stage for what we talk about today. So this is Mark chapter 4. we read verse 1, and then I kind of summarized, and now we'll read verse 20. Others, like seed sown on good soil, or soil that is in good condition, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop 30, some 60, some even 100 times what was sown. This is the idea. This is the why. The sower wants to throw the seed and get something out of it. And not just one thing out of it, but 30, 60, 100. He wants more plants. And really the central part of this that we're going to tap into is that he doesn't just want 30, 60, or 100 anywhere. He wants it exactly where he threw the seed. He didn't throw the seed in the parking lot and say, all right, I want you to jump over across the street to the field and grow there. No, he threw the seed in the field because he wanted the plant to grow in the field and to produce more plants in the same field. He wants the plant to grow where it is. He wants the plant to bloom where it is. He wants the plant to bear seed where it is. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I have this beautiful painting, Bloom Where You Are Planted. So that's it. You can go home now. So let's go in a little bit more detail. So I have a story. So I mentioned these seeds. And again, these are from 2012. And that was a special year for me. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So my mother, who passed away recently, always grew tomato plants. And so that's something he kind of passed down to my mom and to my dad and to me. And so that's kind of our thing as we grow tomatoes every year. And so before he passed away, it was in February, and he had actually planted some seeds and had some seedlings that grew. And so my mom, after he passed away, got those seedlings and gave one to me and gave one to my sister and some of the other family. And so I had this plant. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go plant it. So we got our CCF crowd over here, so y'all will appreciate this story. So I lived at the CCF house, which, again, for your reference point, is about one big block that way on the corner of Fair and Gentilly, a big, bright yellow house. So I planted it behind the shed where, there's a good bit of sunlight, but there's also a water hose right there where I could water it. And I tended to it. And that was that. I did really well at first. I watered it. I fertilized it. I wanted to get something out of this plant. I wanted to get tomatoes. I wanted to be able to make some nice, juicy BLTs. But as it happens in many areas of my life, one day I forgot to water it. Then the next day I forgot to water it. And then I remembered that I forgot to water it. And I felt really bad about not watering it. You ever do that? You mean to do something, or maybe you try to get into the routine of doing something and you do it. You're going good for a while, and then you miss a day, and you miss another day, and then you remember you miss a day, and then you feel bad about it, and then you're like, well, I don't want to feel bad about this, so then you just forget about it again, and then you just keep forgetting about it, and pretty soon it's been months and months, and it's completely ignored. So that's what happened to this plant. Me being, at the time, 21 years old, 20 years old. And so it got to be summer, and it was the time to mow the grass at the CCF house. So, student volunteers mow the grass. So I was mowing the grass, going along, and I passed that plant. I just started thinking about it. Every time I went by the plant, I was just like, man, stupid plant. It's full of weeds, and I was just thinking about it. I can't even tell where the plant is. It's so withered and beaten down. And so, I had the idea, I'm just going to mow over this plant. I'm just going to forget about it. I'm just going to, nope, it's gone. I don't have to think about it anymore. But the more I started thinking about it, the more frustrated I got. And so I finished mowing the grass, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to go see if there's anything worth salvaging in this plant. So I went and pulled up the weeds and re-staked it out and kind of recommitted. Again, going back to the idea of commitment, I recommitted to seeing this plant through. And now it was in bad shape. But now this is a big point that I want to make, is that many times we can't let the condition of our plant discourage us from keeping cultivating it. You got a call? You can take it if you want. So, but there are many different seasons and many different harvests in our life. We all go through different seasons. And there's some season when our plant is going to be in bad shape. There's some seasons when everything just seems to be going right, but then there's some seasons where there's a drought, there's a famine. Things just seem to not go our way. And we can't get discouraged just because our plant doesn't look as full and as lush as everybody else's. So anyways, I decided not to cut down the plant and continued looking into it and caring for it. And I still failed over and over again. I still went weeks without looking after it. But I recommitted and kept watering it, kept fertilizing it. And finally, around my birthday in June, there's a little flower. Most of the plant was just brown. I mean, for a long time I wasn't sure whether it was dead or alive. But there's a little green part on top, and there's a little flower, and finally there's a little bud. And I got excited. I was like, oh man, maybe I'm going to get a tomato. And all of a sudden, I was kind of struggling with my motivation, but when you see that bud, it's like, oh man. Then it was every day, twice a day I was going out there. Okay, nobody come near it. No, stupid deer, we were talking about Sevin dust. Spring that Sevin dust over it, trying to get the hookworms off. And so a little tomato started to bloom. And now, if you've ever grown tomatoes, the way a tomato is supposed to grow is it's green, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and gets to a certain size, and it starts to turn orange and then a little bit redder. And you pick it before it gets completely red, and then you let it sit on the counter, and then you cut it up, and it's good. Well, the way this went is it started green, didn't get very big, and then it started turning a blackish purple color. So that's really not what you want. And it did not get much bigger than a golf ball. But when I was pretty sure it was about to rot, I did pick it, and I took a little piece off and tasted it. It was sour. I was like, well, I can't eat this. But that brings us to the next point. We got to make sure that our plant is done producing before we cut it down. If I had cut down my plant that day, mowed it up, I would have missed out on this now seemingly worthless sour tomato. But it was not done producing. Was not done producing. Because what was inside that little crappy sour tomato? Seeds. And what do we say about seeds? We talked about seeds being kind of timeless in the fact that, you can keep them for a long time. But the other cool thing about seeds is that the fruit doesn't have to be any good for the seed to be good. The fruit didn't taste good, but there was fruit in the fruit, and that was the seed. So I actually kept these seeds, and there's a whole bunch of seeds in there. And so actually, this is one of those seeds that I have with me. So, finishing the story, the next year, so if you want a marker, that was 2011, that was 21. 2012, again, I have a nice reference point. I lived right there in that duplex. I think you can see it right through there. So I lived there, and I planted a couple of the seeds. Now, I had a bunch of seeds, so I planted all those seeds in a little grower, and they all sprouted, and I had about 20. I was like, what in the world am I going to do with these plants? So I gave some of them away to different friends at CCF and stuff like that. But I kept 2 of them for myself, and I let them get big, and I planted them in the ground, and I planted them right by, you can see the sign, Terrell Drive right there, so right there by the mailbox. And I used some lessons I learned from my failures to say, all right, well, I'm going to put this right by the mailbox because that's the way I walk to school every day, right out there. So I see it every day. I could see the weeds, and there's one weed, I'll pull it up. There's a water hose right there, so I could water it, and got plenty of sun. And so they grew into 2 beautiful green plants. Got plenty of tomatoes, I think about 35 tomatoes, and I got to give them out to my friends, make plenty of BLTs, but that never would have happened if I'd given up Now, I could have gotten out and got more seeds. My mom would have given me seeds, but just the illustration of the fact that you can't give up on your plant just because it looks bad, just because it looks bleak. And so there are a couple examples that come to mind. And so, as I said, we did some table talk the last couple weeks, and this is probably the time, if we were doing table talk again, I would say, think about some things where try to make some connections, right? So I said something to you, and maybe you kind of follow, but I would try to get you to make the connection between what does this have to do with me, people, talking about plants. And I think most of you probably are getting the connection. But I'll just make a couple connections that I make. So first of all, just really stupid example. So being a student, I know a lot of y'all are students in here, and most of you have been students. I guess really all of you have been students in some way. But you have a homework assignment, right? And you put off the homework assignment, you put it off. And then maybe you just give up and you drop the class, right? So that's kind of a simple example. But a more serious example, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about this idea of blooming where you're planted, and when you have this plant, not giving up on it, not thinking, man, something's going to be better next year, something's going to, if only I could get this job, if only I could do this, if only I could do that. This kind of idea where focus on where you are now. I think about this a lot in relationships. So I have the privilege of having a whole bunch of important relationships to me here today. So my mother and my father and my grandmother, my wife, who's always here, and then her parents are here as well. But I think about all the different seasons I've had in my relationships with all of these people. And today I'm on very good terms with all of you, and I love all of you very much. But that wasn't always the case. Now, I think the love was always there, but I wasn't always in the best relationship. So if you viewed our relationship as a plant, it wasn't always healthy. And I will say honestly that there are still people in my life where I look at my relationship with them and it is still not healthy, right? But very fortunately, I have a lovely wife. We have a very good relationship. My parents-in-law. But I think about all the seasons of my life with my parents where things weren't going great, where I was making bad choices, and that relationship was strained, and there was so much strain to sever the relationship, to just cut it down, to just move on. And I'm sure they were thinking, if I just had a better son, and maybe I was thinking, if I just had better parents. But in all reality, that parent-child relationship goes through a lot of seasons, and it's not always ripe and good and lush. Sometimes it's withered and it doesn't look too good. And I think about with my wife, Erin, we still go through rough patches, but when we first started dating, so she's 3 years older than me. So when we met, I was 18, and I knew everything, and she was 21, and she really knew everything. But there are a lot of people in her life, a lot of my friends, when we started dating, were like, oh, yeah, man, nice, you got an older girl. Nice, man, nice. But her friends were not so supportive. She had a lot of friends, a lot of mentors in CCF that kind of said to her, what are you doing with this guy? Are you sure this is good? Just looking at the plant of our relationship, it didn't look too good. And so through a lot of ups and downs and a lot of challenges, a lot of screaming at each other and breaking up over 4 years, we would break up for a few minutes, and then I would almost get in my car and drive away. I'm like, let's come back inside. But a lot of times I would pass that plant with the mower and just say, mow it. There's got to be something easier. There's got to be something better. There's got to be a relationship that's easier than this. Maybe next year, maybe in the next season, maybe in the next harvest, things will be better. But you can't cut down the plant before you're sure it's done producing. I'm so glad that I did that with her, because we have a wonderful relationship, we have wonderful friends, and I know that God's really using us in a lot of people's lives right now. And that never would have happened if we had given up during that time. So this idea, we're called to bloom where we are planted. I think it's pretty important. Um, we all go through different seasons. We all go through different times. And again, I think y'all are smart people. You can reach the conclusion. But just to read the scripture again, other like seeds sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop 30, some 60, and some 100 times what was sown. That may not happen this year. That may not happen next year. But you never know what the work you put in today will do 30, 60, 100 years down the line. You'll have your harvest of 30, 60, and 100. So I have this up here, and it's your bulletin image as well. Bloom where you were planted. So you're probably wondering, if there's a story behind this. Well, when me and Aaron went on our honeymoon, there was actually an independent artist that did paintings. And if you know me at all, you know I'm very frugal, and I don't just spend money for no reason. So Aaron drags me to these thrift stores and these independent artist shops, and she's like, oh, look at this, look at this. And I'm like, this doesn't serve a purpose. But this is an example of something that actually kind of caught me. So this artist had this, and it reminded me of kind of our story. And so that's why I ended up buying it. It's because, I was just reminded that all the times where things got tough, I never gave up, and it brought me to where I was today. So it serves as a good reminder to me, and I hope it will serve as a good reminder to you that we're all called to bloom where we are planted.